Just bow.
Hit the fire! Heat the fire! 7 times hotter!
We trust our God to deliver us. But even if he does not, we will never bow.
I will show them who's God!
The eternal word, a light unto the ages, now revealed.
Hello. Welcome to The Bible Told. I am Pastor Rod. If this is your first time here, hit the like button and then share this video and subscribe. Before we even get into the furnace, before we get to King Nebuchadnezzar, before we get to one of the greatest miracles, I believe, in the entire Bible, can we just stop for a second? Because I think a lot of us, we read this story and we jump straight to the exciting part. We want to get to the fire. We want to get to the fourth man. We want to get to the miracle. But none of that happens without what comes first. You see, before there was ever a furnace, there was a loss. I want you to think about it. Have you ever had life hit you so hard that everything literally changed overnight? Think about it. One phone call, one doctor's visit, one betrayal, one mistake, one moment, and now your whole life looks different. Yeah, that's where these young men were. They didn't wake up one morning talking about, let's go get ourselves thrown into the fiery furnace. No, their city had been destroyed. Their homes were gone. Their families had been ripped apart. Everything familiar had been taken away from them. And if we gonna be honest, some of y'all know exactly what that feels like. I mean, maybe not by an army, but life, man, life have a way of invading your peace. Life has a way of taking things you never thought you'd lose. And here's what I love about the Bible. It don't start by showing us superheroes. It shows us real people dealing with real hurt and pain. People asking questions like, God, where are you? What are you doing? Why did this happen to me? See, if you've ever asked those questions, you're not the first. But here's what I need y'all to catch before we move on. You see, Babylon wasn't just trying to conquer a city. Oh, no. Babylon was trying to change people. It wanted them to think different, live different, forget who they were, forget whose they were. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because the world is doing the same thing today. Every day, somebody's telling you what you should believe, who you should become, what you should accept, how you should live. It's pressure, constant pressure. Just blend in. Don't stand out. Don't make people uncomfortable. Don't be different. Just bow. And that's why this story still hits today. This ain't just an old Bible story. Oh, no. This is about every believer that's trying to stay faithful in a world that's constantly telling them to compromise. So before we see the miracle, let's just watch how God prepares them for it. Because one thing I've learned in this, God usually does his greatest work in you before he ever does something through you.
The journey to Babylon was long enough for the dust to settle on their clothes, long enough for exhaustion to replace shock, long enough for 3 young men to realize that the life they once knew was gone. Day after day, the road stretched endlessly before them. Each step carried them farther from Jerusalem, farther from home, farther from everything familiar. The voices they heard around them were different. The customs were different. The gods were different. And with every mile, the reality became harder to ignore. They were captives now, no longer free to choose where they lived, no longer free to decide their future, no longer masters of their own lives. Then one day, the horizon began to change. At first they saw the walls, massive, towering, stretching farther than the eye could see. Then came the watchtowers, then the gates, and then Babylon. For a moment, it must have seemed impossible. The city rose from the earth like something built by giants. Its walls stood as monuments to human power. Its temples reached toward the heavens. Its streets overflowed with merchants, soldiers, officials, and travelers from every corner of the known world. Everything about Babylon made one message unmistakably clear. This empire ruled the world. Imagine standing there, a young captive from Judah, looking up at a city so vast it seemed to swallow the horizon. A city that had conquered nations. A city that had crushed your homeland. A city that worshipped gods you did not believe in. A city determined to reshape your future. The message was clear. Babylon had won. Or at least that's what it wanted them to believe. The days that followed only reinforced that message. The young captives chosen for service in the king's court were carefully selected. They were educated in Babylonian wisdom, trained in Babylonian customs, surrounded by Babylonian culture. Every part of their new life was designed to transform them, slowly, patiently, completely. This empire understood something. If you want to control people, you don't always have to use chains. Sometimes you simply change the way they think, change what they value, change what they believe, change who they are. And so the process began. One day, the officials gave them new names: Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Names connected to the God of their fathers, names that reminded them who they were, names that carried meaning, history, identity. But Babylon wanted even that. So new names were assigned: Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. To many people it may have seemed like a small thing, just different names, just another adjustment, just another part of life in Babylon. But it was much more than that, because Babylon wasn't simply changing what they were called. Babylon was attempting to redefine who they were. Every day brought new pressure. Pressure to fit in, pressure to adapt, pressure to blend into the culture around them. After all, who would blame them? Their homeland was gone. Their city was gone. Their future seemed uncertain. Wouldn't it be easier to just move on? Wouldn't it be easier to become like everyone else? Wouldn't it be easier to let go of the convictions that made them different? But somehow, through the years, they held on. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but faithfully. While Babylon worked tirelessly to reshape them, something else was happening beneath the surface. Their faith was growing stronger. The very circumstances that should have broken them were preparing them. The trials that should have destroyed their convictions were deepening them. And though they could not see it yet, God was doing something remarkable. Because sometimes God prepares people for a moment long before that moment arrives. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are not born in a single day. They are forged through years of quiet faithfulness, years of choosing conviction over convenience, years of remembering who you belong to when the world is trying to tell you otherwise. And year after year, these young men remained faithful. They served in Babylon. They learned its language. They worked within its system. But deep inside, something remained untouched. Their loyalty belonged to God, not to Babylon, not to its idols, not even to its king. And that king was a man unlike any ruler of his time. His name was Nebuchadnezzar, the man who had conquered Jerusalem, the man who commanded one of the most powerful empires on earth, the man whose word could determine whether people lived or died. Kings feared him, nations feared him, entire armies feared him. When Nebuchadnezzar spoke, people listened. When Nebuchadnezzar commanded, people obeyed. No one challenged him. No one questioned him. No one stood against him. At least, not for long. And as the years passed, Nebuchadnezzar's power only grew. His wealth increased. His influence expanded. His confidence became something even greater: pride. The kind of pride that convinces a man he is untouchable. The kind of pride that makes a king believe his greatness deserves admiration, even worship. And soon, that pride would give birth to a command that would shake the entire empire. A command that would gather people from every nation. A command that would force every person to make a choice: bow or burn. And when that day came, 3 young men would find themselves standing where no one would ever want to stand. Alone, surrounded, outnumbered, and facing a decision that could cost them everything.
Look at Babylon. Every wall, every tower, every nation beneath my hand. Kings have fallen before me. Jerusalem was crushed beneath my feet. My word gives life, and my word takes it away. There is no ruler like me.
My kingdom has grown. My power has filled the earth. Let all who see this image remember who rules Babylon. Honor given to the throne will not be withheld. People of Babylon, rulers, governors, officials, and nations of my empire, behold the image I have raised. When my command is given, every knee will bow, every head will lower. Let no man refuse the king.
By command of King Nebuchadnezzar, all people shall bow before the golden image. We bow, my lord. Do not look up, stay down.
Behold Babylon. Behold my power.
The world bows when I speak.
As the years passed, Babylon continued to grow. Its influence stretched farther, its wealth increased, its armies remained undefeated, and at the center of it all stood one man, King Nebuchadnezzar, a king whose victories had convinced many that nothing was beyond his reach. A king who had spent years building an empire unlike anything the world had ever seen. But power has a way of changing people. The more a person possesses, the easier it becomes to believe they deserve even more. Respect becomes admiration. Admiration becomes obsession. And eventually some begin to crave something that belongs to God alone: worship. It began quietly. At first, people noticed unusual activity outside the city. Large groups of workers moving in and out of the plains, wagons carrying materials, soldiers guarding construction sites, messengers traveling back and forth with urgency. Something was being built, something important, something the king clearly wanted completed without delay. Rumors spread throughout Babylon. People speculated. Questions circulated through markets and city streets. What was Nebuchadnezzar building? Why was so much effort being devoted to this project? Why did it seem to matter so much to the king? Day after day, the structure grew higher and higher and higher still, until eventually the answer could no longer be hidden. Rising above the plain stood a massive golden image, towering over the landscape, visible from incredible distances. Its shining surface reflected the sunlight across the horizon. It dominated everything around it. People couldn't ignore it if they tried. Wherever you stood, it seemed to demand your attention. And perhaps that was exactly the point. This was more than a monument, more than a work of architecture, more than a display of wealth. This was a declaration of power, a declaration of greatness, a declaration that all eyes should be fixed on what Nebuchadnezzar had built. Soon after its completion, another announcement spread throughout the empire. This time, there was no mystery. There were no rumors, only commands, official commands. Every governor, every ruler, every judge, every official, every leader, every representative throughout the empire was ordered to gather for a special dedication ceremony. No one was excluded. No one was invited by choice. Attendance was expected. The command traveled from province to province, across cities, across villages, across distant territories. People began preparing for the journey. The event became the topic of conversation everywhere. What would happen at the dedication? Why had the king gathered so many people? What was so important about this golden image? Among those receiving the summons were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Like many others serving within Babylon's government, they were expected to attend. There was no reason to refuse, no reason to suspect what was coming, at least not yet. So they traveled with the others, officials, advisors, leaders, representatives from every corner of the empire, thousands upon thousands of people moving toward a single destination. And when they finally arrived, the sight before them was overwhelming. There it stood, the golden image, massive, towering, almost impossible to comprehend. People gathered around its base looked insignificant by comparison, tiny, like shadows standing beneath a mountain of gold. The crowd continued to grow. Officials took their places. Soldiers maintained order. Musicians assembled their instruments. The atmosphere felt different, heavy, expectant. Everyone could sense that something significant was about to happen, but few understood just how significant. Then the moment arrived. A royal herald stepped forward. His voice carried across the crowd. The noise began to fade. Conversations stopped. Thousands of eyes turned toward the messenger. Whatever he was about to say had come directly from the king. And when a message came from Nebuchadnezzar, people listened. The herald raised his voice and delivered the command. People from every nation, every language, every region. When the music begins to play, you're to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. The words settled over the crowd like a storm cloud. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the second part of the command. The part no one expected. The part that changed everything. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Just like that, the choice was made clear. There would be no exceptions, no negotiations, no compromises, no middle ground, bow or burn. And somewhere within that enormous crowd stood three young men who suddenly found themselves facing the greatest test of their lives. Not because they lacked faith, but because now their faith would cost them something. The music had not started yet. The decision had not been made yet. The crowd remained standing, but the moment was coming. fast. And when it arrived, an entire empire would bow as one. Or at least, almost the entire empire. The day had finally arrived. From every corner of the empire, people gathered on the plain of Dura. Officials, governors, military commanders, judges, advisors, leaders, thousands upon thousands of people standing beneath the shadow of the golden image. And towering above them all stood the monument Nebuchadnezzar had built. Its golden surface blazed beneath the sun. Impossible to ignore, impossible not to see. It stood as a symbol of Babylon's power, a symbol of the king's greatness. And now every eye was fixed upon it. The crowd waited. The air felt heavy, expectant. No one spoke much. No one needed to. Everyone knew why they were there. Everyone knew what was about to happen. Somewhere among that massive gathering stood Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. 3 young men who had spent years living in Babylon. 3 young men who had learned its language, served within its government, adapted to life far from home. Yet through it all, they had remained faithful to the God of Israel. Now that faith was about to be tested, not privately, not quietly, not in secret, before everyone. The king's command had been clear. When the music began, every person was to bow before the golden image. Failure was not an option. The punishment had already been announced. A blazing furnace, certain death. No appeals, no second chances, no mercy. Just one simple choice: bow or burn. For many in the crowd, the decision had already been made. After all, what was one moment of compromise? What was one bow? What was one act of obedience to save your life? Perhaps some convinced themselves it didn't really mean anything. Perhaps others believed survival was more important than conviction. Perhaps many never questioned the command at all. Whatever the reason, the outcome would be the same. When the music played, they would bow, and they would live. The musicians lifted their instruments. A hush settled across the plain. Thousands stood waiting, watching, anticipating. Then the sound came. The first notes echoed across the crowd. Trumpets, horns, strings, voices, a powerful wave of music rolling across the open plain. And instantly, people began to move. Rows upon rows of officials dropped to their knees. Governors lowered themselves toward the ground. Military commanders bowed. Advisors bowed. Leaders bowed. The movement spread across the plain like a wave, thousands lowering themselves before the image, thousands choosing safety, thousands choosing survival, heads lowered, knees bent, faces turned toward the ground, an entire empire bowing together, but not everyone. 3 figures remained standing: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. No army stood beside them, no crowd supported them. No voice defended them. They stood surrounded by people who had chosen differently, people who had chosen the safer path, people who had chosen the easier path. Yet still they remained standing. Not because they were fearless, not because they were reckless, not because they believed they were stronger than everyone else, but because they knew who they belonged to. Everywhere they looked, people were bowing. Thousands upon thousands, heads lowered, knees bent, an entire empire surrendering before the image of a king. But 3 young men remained standing. 3 against thousands, faithful, exposed, completely visible, and for the first time, everyone could see them.
bowing. They're still standing. Those men refused. Do they not fear the king? Someone tell the king.
Can we just stop right there? Because we've heard this story so many times that I think we've lost how crazy this moment really is. I'm serious. Put yourself there. This ain't somebody unfollowing you on social media. This ain't somebody clowning you at work because you're a Christian. This ain't somebody leaving a mean comment. Y'all, this is life or death. And literally, you see everybody else looking at him like, they ain't bowing. Somebody go tell the king. The most powerful man on the planet just gave an order. Everybody obeyed. Everybody. The music starts and thousands of people hit the ground. Now, imagine you're the only one standing. I want you to think about that. You literally can hear the music. You can see everybody bowing. You know the soldiers looking at you. You know the king, he's going to find out. You know what's waiting for you if you don't move. That's pressure. And if I'm being real, I think a lot of us like to believe we'd be standing too. You say, yes, Pastor Rock, I sure would be standing. But you know what? Would you? And that's a real question, because it's easy to talk tough when you're sitting in your pews at church. It's easy to say, I ain't gonna never compromise when you're sitting, in the comfort of your own home. It's easy to say, I'd stand for Jesus until standing actually gonna cost you something, until it costs you that relationship, until it costs you that promotion, until it costs you your friends, until people start looking at you like you the crazy one. That's when you find out what you really believe and what you're made of. Now, here's what blows my mind. These brothers had no clue what God was about to do. See, we know what God is going to do because we've read the story. But in that moment, they ain't know. They didn't know there was going to be a fourth man in the fire. They didn't know the king was about to change his tune. They didn't know this story would be preached thousands of years later. Look, as far as they knew, this was it. This could have been the last day they ever took a breath, and they still didn't bow. That's faith. Not faith because you know everything's going to work out. Faith because God is still worthy, even if it don't work out. You see, that's the kind of faith I want to have. Amen. That's the kind of faith you should want to have. Not the kind that's only strong when life is good. Not the kind that's only bold when there ain't nothing to lose. I'm talking about the kind that says, Lord, whether this goes my way or not, I'm still yours. Now, here's the thing, y'all. Everybody on the plane, they saw them. The crowd saw them. The soldiers saw him. The officials saw them. And let me just remind y'all, these boys, they had status. So they was sacrificing and giving up everything. Trust me, Nebuchadnezzar is about to hear about it. Because kings like him, they don't ignore people who challenge their authority. And what happens next? This is where the story really turns.
It didn't take long. A crowd that large could not keep a secret, an act of courage that public could not remain hidden. While thousands remained bowed before the golden image, certain officials were already moving through the crowd, watching, observing, looking for anyone who had failed to obey. And when they saw them, they could hardly believe it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, still standing, still refusing to bow, still refusing to submit. These were not strangers. These were not ordinary citizens. These were men who held positions within the king's administration. Men who had been trusted, men who had been given responsibility. And now, in front of the entire empire, they had openly defied the king's command. The officials wasted no time. They hurried away from the gathering and made their way toward Nebuchadnezzar. Their words carefully chosen, their accusations deliberate, almost eager. as though they had been waiting for an opportunity like this. Your Majesty, didn't you issue a decree requiring every person to bow before the golden image when the music played? And didn't you declare that anyone who refused would be thrown into the blazing furnace? The king listened. His expression remained unchanged for the moment. Then came the accusation. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The names hung in the air. The officials continued. They pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods. They refuse to worship the golden image you have set up. For a moment, there was silence, a dangerous silence. The kind of silence that comes just before a storm breaks. The king's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. The report settled heavily upon him. Not because 3 men had broken a rule, not because a law had been violated, but because 3 men had dared to challenge his authority, publicly, openly, before the eyes of an empire. This was bigger than disobedience. This was humiliation. Nebuchadnezzar had conquered nations. Kings trembled before him. Cities fell at his command. Entire armies scattered at the mention of his name. Yet somehow 3 captives from a conquered nation had looked at his command and said no. Fury began to rise within him, hot, violent, uncontrolled, the kind of rage born from wounded pride. Immediately, he ordered that the young men be brought before him. Guards were dispatched. The crowd watched. Whispers spread. People pointed. The 3 men were escorted through the gathering, surrounded by soldiers, passing beneath the shadow of the golden image they had refused to worship. Every eye followed them. Everyone knew what the punishment was. Everyone knew what happened to those who challenged Nebuchadnezzar. Everyone knew how this story was supposed to end. Soon they stood in the king's presence, 3 men facing the most powerful ruler on earth. One command from his lips could end their lives. One gesture of his hand could send them to the furnace. The throne room fell silent. Nebuchadnezzar stared at them. The anger in his eyes was impossible to miss. Yet beneath that anger was something else, disbelief. How could they have done this? How could they have ignored his command? How could they have chosen this path when the consequences were so obvious? Finally, the king spoke. His voice carried both fury and restraint, as though he were forcing himself not to explode. Is it true? The question echoed through the room. Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image I have set up? The room remained silent. The young men stood before him, unmoved, unshaken. The king leaned forward. Perhaps part of him hoped there had been a misunderstanding. Perhaps part of him wanted to avoid making an example of them. Or perhaps his pride simply demanded one final opportunity to watch them submit. Whatever the reason, he offered them another chance. A chance no one else had been given. A chance to save themselves. A chance to live. When the music plays again, you will bow. The words carried the weight of a command, not a request, not a negotiation, a command. And for a brief moment it may have sounded like mercy, but it wasn't mercy. It was a demand for surrender. Nebuchadnezzar didn't simply want obedience, he wanted submission. He wanted these young men to abandon their convictions. He wanted them to choose fear over faith. He wanted to prove that no one could stand against him. Then his voice grew colder, darker, more dangerous. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. The threat hung heavily in the air. No one doubted he meant it. No one questioned whether he would follow through. This was Nebuchadnezzar, a king who had destroyed cities, a king who had crushed nations, a king who believed his power had no equal. Then came the question that revealed just how far his pride had carried him. The question that turned this confrontation into something much larger than three young men standing before a king. Nebuchadnezzar looked directly at them and said, "Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" The room went silent. The guards stood motionless. The officials waited. The king stared. And before him stood three young men who suddenly found themselves facing a question that would reveal the true depth of their faith. Not when life was easy, not when obedience was comfortable, but now, when the furnace was real, when death felt certain, when every reason to compromise stood directly in front of them, and all of Babylon waited to hear their answer. The room was silent, not the kind of silence that brings peace, the kind that comes when everyone is waiting for something to break. The king had spoken, the threat had been made, the challenge had been issued. Now every eye in the room was fixed on three young men. The officials waited. The guards waited. The king waited. Surely they would change their minds. Surely they would see reason. Surely they would realize this wasn't a battle they could win. After all, what choice did they really have? The furnace was real. The threat was real. Death was real. One bow would make it all disappear. One moment of compromise, one act of surrender, one decision, and they could walk away alive. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had already made their decision long before they entered that room. Long before the music played, long before the king's anger erupted, long before the furnace became their destination, their answer had already been settled in their hearts. And now they spoke, not with anger, not with hatred, not with defiance, but with a calmness that must have seemed almost impossible. "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter." The words hung in the air. The room remained motionless. Even the king seemed surprised. There was no panic in their voices, no desperation, no attempt to bargain for their lives. Only certainty. A certainty that did not come from knowing what would happen, but from knowing who God was. Then they continued. "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it." For a moment, those words almost sounded like the ending everyone wanted. The God we serve is able. What faith, what confidence, what courage. But they weren't finished, because the deepest faith is not found in believing God can. The deepest faith is found in trusting Him, even when He doesn't. And then came the words that have echoed through history ever since. Words spoken by three young men staring death in the face. Words that revealed the true strength of their faith. But even if He does not, no promises, no guarantees, no certainty of rescue, no expectation of a miracle, only trust. Pure trust, the kind of trust that remains when every visible reason for hope has disappeared. The kind of trust that says God is still worthy even if the answer is no. The kind of trust that says obedience matters more than survival. The kind of trust that cannot be threatened, bought, or intimidated. But even if He does not, we want you to know, O King, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the image of gold you have set up. There it was, their final answer. Not because they knew God would save them, not because they expected a miracle, not because they believed they would escape the flames, but because they had already decided that God was worthy of their obedience no matter the outcome. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. The most powerful king on earth stood before three men he could not control. He could imprison them. He could threaten them. He could condemn them. He could order their execution, but he could not make them bow. Nebuchadnezzar's face twisted with rage. The restraint he had shown moments earlier vanished. His pride had been challenged. His authority had been challenged. His gods had been challenged. And now, standing before his entire court, three captives had refused him to his face. The fury that filled him was unlike anything the room had seen before. His expression darkened. His eyes burned with anger. The king who had offered a second chance was gone. Now only wrath remained. He barked orders immediately. The furnace was to be heated hotter than ever before, 7 times hotter, hot enough to leave no doubt, hot enough to erase any possibility of survival, hot enough to make an example of anyone who dared follow their path. The strongest soldiers in his army were summoned. The command was given, bind them, take them to the furnace. And as the guards moved forward, Babylon believed it was about to witness the end of 3 faithful young men. But heaven was preparing to tell a different story.
Why are they still standing? They did not bow. Those Hebrews refused.
Bow down! Get down!
Is it true? You refuse to serve my gods? You refuse to worship the image I have set up? I will give you one more chance. When the sound is given, you will bow. But if you do not bow, you will be thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And what god will deliver you out of my hands? O king, you can save your trumpets. We will never bow or worship the image you set up.
Guards! Seize them! Prepare the furnace! Throw them into the fire! Take them! Move! Heat the fire 7 times hotter! I will show them who's God! It's too hot back! I am God!
Woo, that old king mad boy. I already know. He say, I'm going to show you who's God. I'm God. Oh, boy. But listen, I don't want to run past this part too fast. Did y'all catch something? You see, this right here might be one of the coldest statements of faith in the whole Bible, though. I want you to notice something that the 3 Hebrew boys didn't say. They didn't say God's definitely getting us out of this. They didn't say, don't worry. We already know how this is going to end. They didn't say we'll be back in a few minutes and then we're going to give you our answer. Nope. They said, man, our God is able. Then they hit old Nebuchadnezzar with something that still challenges I'm talking about, it challenges me every time I read it. They said, but even if he don't. How many of y'all can say that? Oh, how many of you can say, I've been praying for this healing. I've been praying for this, but even if he don't. Do you know how strong your faith got to be to say a line like that? Because let's be honest, most of us don't mind trusting God as long as the outcome is good. We'll shout when the doctor's report comes back clean. We'll praise him when the money shows up in your bank account. We'll post Bible verses. I'm talking about on doorposts. We'll put them on social media and everything when doors start opening. But what happens when none of that happens? What happens when what you've been praying for months and nothing changes? What happens when the healing don't come? What happens when the relationship falls apart? What happens when the answer is wait, or worse, nope? Can you still trust him then? Can you still say, but even if he don't? You see, that's where real faith shows up. Real faith ain't saying, God, I'll follow you if you fix my situation. Real faith says, God, Whether you fix it or not, I'm still following you. You see, that's where these brothers are. Their faith wasn't hanging on a miracle. It was hanging on God. And there's a huge difference. You see, a lot of people are committed to the blessing, but these three Hebrew boys, they were committed to the one who gives the blessings. That's why they couldn't be shaken. This is because they weren't standing on feelings. They weren't standing on emotions. They weren't standing on a wishful thinking. I hope he deliver us. They say, man, but even if he don't. They were standing on who they knew God to be. And don't miss this part. At this point in the story, they have no clue what's about to happen. They don't know there's about to be a fourth man coming. They don't know they're about to walk through fire without even smelling like smoke. They don't know that a king who just said, I'm going to show you who's God, I'm God, is about to stand speechless. And as far as they're concerned, they're about to die. They saying, this is it. We love you, Shadrach, Meshach, love you. They still refuse to bow, knowing all of this. Y'all, that's hitting different. That's the kind of faith I pray God builds in me. I ain't gonna lie. I'm honest. That's the kind that doesn't fold when life gets hard. That's the kind that doesn't disappear when prayers don't get answered on my schedule, by my time. That's the kind that says, Lord, you're still God. Now the conversation's over. You see, the king's done talking. The king, he done gave the order. He's hot. He said, light the fire 7 times. I'm going to show him who's God. The soldiers are already moving. This ain't a warning no more. Old king is showing you who he is. They are about to find out if the God they've been talking about for all of these years is really going to meet them in that fire.
The order had been given. There would be no more discussions, no more opportunities, no more chances to change their minds. Nebuchadnezzar had made his decision. The furnace would decide the rest. The king's servants moved quickly. Strong soldiers stepped forward and seized Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Ropes were brought. Their hands were bound. Their freedom was taken, but something remarkable remained untouched. Their faith. The same faith that had carried them through the loss of Jerusalem. The same faith that had sustained them through years in Babylon. The same faith that had stood when everyone else bowed. Now it would walk with them toward the fire. Around them, the empire watched. The officials watched. The soldiers watched. The crowd watched. Thousands of eyes followed every movement. No one spoke. No one intervened. No one stepped forward. 3 young men were being led toward what appeared to be certain death, and everyone knew it. The furnace stood waiting, massive, terrifying. Its flames surged upward into the sky. Its opening glowed with a fierce and unnatural brightness. Heat radiated from it in waves. Even from a distance, people could feel it. The closer the soldiers led them, the more unbearable it became. The air itself seemed to burn. The ground beneath their feet grew hotter. Every step brought them nearer to the flames, nearer to the place where their story was supposed to end. Imagine that walk. Imagine knowing exactly where you were going. Imagine hearing the roar of the fire growing louder with every step. Imagine feeling the heat against your skin. Imagine knowing there was still time to change your mind, still time to bow, still time to surrender. Yet they continued forward, bound, outnumbered, condemned, but faithful. Somewhere in the crowd, people may have looked away, unable to watch. Others may have shaken their heads, certain they were witnessing the consequences of foolishness. Perhaps some even pitied them. 3 young men, so close to life, so close to success, so close to a future. and now all of it about to disappear in a matter of moments. But while the crowd saw defeat, heaven saw something entirely different. As the soldiers approached the furnace, the heat became overwhelming. Nebuchadnezzar had ordered it heated 7 times hotter than normal. Whether the number was literal or a way of expressing his rage, the result was unmistakable. The furnace had become an inferno, a raging monument to the king's fury. Its flames exploded outward. Its heat consumed everything near it. Even the strongest soldiers struggled to approach. Yet the king's command could not be ignored. Forward they went, closer, closer still, until finally they reached the opening. And then it happened. The fire that Nebuchadnezzar had intended for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego struck first, not against the young men, against the soldiers. The flames burst outward with such intensity that the very men carrying out the execution were overwhelmed. In an instant, they were consumed by the furnace's deadly heat. The strongest soldiers in Babylon fell before the fire. The crowd gasped. Chaos rippled through those watching. No one expected that. No one anticipated the furnace itself would become a threat to the king's own men. Yet the command remained, and bound hand and foot, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were cast into the blazing furnace, into the flames, into the heat, into what should have been the end. And for a moment, it appeared that Babylon had won. The king watched, the officials watched, the crowd watched, the fire roared, the flames danced, the furnace burned with terrifying intensity. And somewhere inside that inferno were 3 faithful young men, hidden by the fire, gone from sight. No movement, no voices, nothing. Only flames, only silence, only the terrible certainty that no one could survive such a thing. For a brief moment, it seemed over. The king had spoken, the furnace had obeyed, and the story had reached its conclusion, or so everyone believed. Then something happened, something so unexpected, so impossible, so utterly beyond explanation that it would stop a king in his tracks. Nebuchadnezzar leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the furnace. At first he wasn't sure what he was seeing. Something was wrong. Something inside the fire was not happening the way it should. The king blinked, looked again, and suddenly the certainty vanished from his face. Confusion appeared, then disbelief, then something else, something that very few people had ever seen in the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar. Fear. Because inside the furnace, something was moving.
Wait. Something is wrong. Look! They are not burning.
What is happening?
Do you see that?
That cannot be possible.
Nebuchadnezzar stared into the furnace. At first, he thought his eyes were deceiving him. That had to be it. The flames were too intense, the heat too fierce, the smoke too thick. Surely what he was seeing couldn't be real. He blinked, looked again, and the confusion only grew. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The furnace had done exactly what it was designed to do. The strongest soldiers in his army had been killed simply approaching it. No human being could survive inside those flames. No one. Yet movement caught his attention. Movement where there should have been death. The king leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the inferno, his heart racing, trying desperately to make sense of what he was seeing. Around him, officials began noticing the change in his expression. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. The man who had condemned 3 young men to death was suddenly staring into the fire as though he had seen a ghost. Nebuchadnezzar rose from his throne, his gaze never leaving the furnace. Then he turned suddenly toward his advisors, his voice sharp, almost desperate. Weren't there 3 men? The question stunned them. They looked at one another. Of course, there had been 3. Everyone had watched it happen. Everyone had seen them bound. Everyone had seen them thrown into the fire. Certainly, Your Majesty. 3. There had only been 3. The king turned back toward the flames, his breathing shallow, his eyes wide. Then he spoke again, this time louder, this time with disbelief flooding every word. "Look!" The entire crowd seemed to freeze. "Look! I see 4 men!" A wave of confusion swept through those gathered around him. 4? There couldn't be 4. Only 3 had entered. Only 3. But Nebuchadnezzar wasn't imagining it. Inside the furnace, 4 figures moved among the flames. Not crawling, not suffering, not dying. Walking, freely, calmly, as though the fire itself had lost its power. The king couldn't comprehend it. The ropes were gone. The chains were gone. The men he had condemned were no longer bound. They were walking through the very thing meant to destroy them. Then Nebuchadnezzar saw him, the 4th figure. And everything about this figure was different. The king's voice nearly failed him. His eyes remained locked on the furnace. Awe replacing fury, shock replacing pride, fear replacing certainty. Then the words slipped from his lips, words he never expected to speak. And the 4th, his voice trembled, the 4th looks like the son of the gods. Silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the king seemed unable to tear his eyes away. Moments earlier, he had challenged heaven itself. Moments earlier, he had demanded worship. Moments earlier, he had asked, "What God can rescue you from my hand?" Now the answer stood before him. Not outside the furnace, inside it. The fire that was supposed to prove Nebuchadnezzar's power had become a stage displaying a far greater power. The king who believed himself unstoppable now stood speechless. The ruler who commanded nations could do nothing but watch, because there, in the middle of the flames, stood a king greater than him, a king untouched by fire, a king standing beside his faithful servants, and for the first time that day, Nebuchadnezzar looked small, very small, because the furnace belonged to him, but the fire belonged to God.
Something is wrong! Do you see it? Wait, did we not throw 3 men into the fire?
Yes, O king, you did.
Then why do I see 4 men? Look! I see 4 men. And one of them looks like the son of the gods.
Come out! Come here!
I don't understand. There are no burns. Their clothes are untouched.
I don't even smell smoke.
Not even their hair is shamed. The fire had no power over them.
No one moved. No one spoke. The entire plain seemed frozen in place. Thousands of people stood staring at the furnace, staring at the impossible. Moments earlier, they had watched 3 young men disappear into the flames. Now, those same young men were walking inside the fire, alive, free, unharmed, and they were not alone. Nebuchadnezzar stood motionless, his eyes locked on the furnace, unable to look away, unable to explain what he was seeing. The king who had spent years commanding armies now found himself speechless before a sight he could not control. The fire was still burning. The flames were still roaring. Yet somehow the men inside remained untouched. Every law of nature seemed suspended. Every expectation shattered, every certainty destroyed, and for the first time that day, Nebuchadnezzar realized there was a power in this furnace, greater than his own. The king slowly stepped forward, closer to the opening, closer to the flames. Not with arrogance, not with pride, but with something that had been absent from him for most of this story: reverence, awe. The same man who had demanded worship now found himself standing before a power he could neither command nor understand. The crowd watched in silence. The officials watched in silence. The soldiers watched in silence. Nobody knew what to say. Nobody knew what to do. Then Nebuchadnezzar called out, his voice carrying across the plain. Not the voice of a king issuing a threat, not the voice of a ruler demanding obedience, the voice of a man who had just witnessed something that shattered his understanding of reality. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego! For a moment the only response was the roar of the flames. Then the king continued, and what he said next revealed just how much had changed. Servants of the Most High God. The words echoed across the crowd. Servants of the Most High God. Not rebels, not criminals, not condemned men. Servants of the Most High God. The king who had challenged their God now publicly acknowledged him. The king who had demanded worship now found himself speaking with respect. The king who had believed himself supreme now stood in the shadow of a greater authority. Come out. Come here. Thousands held their breath. The crowd stared at the furnace, waiting, watching, wondering what would happen next. Then movement appeared within the flames. 3 figures, not 4, 3. The mysterious 4th figure remained behind, but the young men began moving toward the opening, step by step, walking through the very fire that should have consumed them, walking through the inferno that had taken the lives of Babylon's strongest soldiers, walking through the furnace that moments earlier had seemed like certain death. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Every step felt impossible. Every movement defied explanation. Yet there they were, alive, unhurried, unafraid. And then they emerged, out of the furnace, back into the daylight, back before the eyes of the empire, back before the king who had condemned them. The same men who had entered the flames, yet somehow different, not because the fire had harmed them, but because they had walked where no one should be able to walk. They had stood where no one should be able to stand. They had experienced something no one else on that plain had witnessed. The presence of God in the middle of the fire. A hush settled over the crowd. No cheers, no shouting, only amazement, the kind of silence that comes when people know they have witnessed something beyond human explanation. Nebuchadnezzar stared at them. The officials stared at them. The soldiers stared at them. Everyone stared. Because the question now was unavoidable. How could this be? How could anyone survive that furnace? How could anyone walk through those flames? How could 3 young men emerge from that fire alive? The answer stood right in front of them, not in the strength of the men, not in their courage, not in their determination, but in the God who had met them there. And as the crowd gathered around them, preparing to see for themselves what the fire had done, they were about to discover something even more astonishing.
before we finish this story, can we talk for a minute? Because I think a lot of people, they miss where the real miracle is. You see, the miracle wasn't that there wasn't a fire, because there was. The furnace was absolutely real. That king was doggone serious, as you saw. The fear was absolutely real. Those flames would have killed anybody else easily. God never looked at those brothers and said, ain't nothing gonna happen. No, he let them walk right into it. And I know somebody watching this don't like hearing that, because if we're going to be honest, most of us want God to keep us out of every fire. Lord, remove it. Lord, I don't even want to go that way. Lord, fix it. Lord, make it go away. And sometimes he does. Praise God when he does. But sometimes he don't remove the fire. He meets you in it. Oh, man, that's a whole different kind of comfort. Because if you've walked with Jesus long enough, you already know this. Following him don't mean life gets easy. Christians get sick. Christians lose people they love. Christians lose jobs. Christians cry. Christians go through seasons where they don't understand what God is doing. But here's the difference between a Christian and a non-Christian. You see, we don't walk through those seasons by ourselves. That's what I love about the story. Jesus didn't stand outside the furnace yelling, y'all got this. No, he got in there with them. I need y'all to let that literally sink in. The place everybody thought was going to destroy them is the very place where they experience God's presence in a way they'd never experienced it before. Now, please, don't miss this part, because this part really blessed me. When they got thrown into the fire, they went in tied up. They were bound, couldn't move, couldn't free themselves. But when the king looks inside, he noticed they're walking around. Wait a minute, hold up a second. The fire didn't even burn them. It burned what they had on. In other words, it burnt what had them bound. Ooh, that's good. You see, sometimes God won't remove the fire because he's using it to burn off something that's been holding you back. Sometimes he's breaking pride. Sometimes he's breaking fear. Sometimes he's breaking the thing you've been carrying for years. And the enemy thought the fire was going to finish you. God said, nope, I'm going to use it to free you. So if you're in a fire right now, don't automatically assume God left you. Don't automatically think he's forgotten you. He may be closer than he's ever been. Because sometimes the place you experience God the deepest is the very place you wanted to avoid the most. And that's exactly what Babylon was about to find out. You see, the fire didn't prove God wasn't with them. It proved he was.
As the shock slowly settled over the plain, people began moving closer, carefully, almost cautiously, as though they still couldn't believe what they had witnessed. The officials came first, the governors, the advisors, the military leaders, the same men who had watched Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego disappear into the furnace only moments earlier. Now they stood around them in stunned silence, looking, examining, trying to find some explanation, some evidence, something that made sense. But the more they looked, the more impossible it became. There were no burns, no wounds, no scorched skin, no signs of injury. The fire that had killed Babylon's strongest soldiers had somehow left these men untouched. The officials moved closer, studying their clothing. Surely the flames had damaged something. Surely there would be some evidence, a torn garment, a burned sleeve, a mark left behind, anything. But there was nothing. Their clothes were exactly as they'd been before entering the furnace. Their hair wasn't singed. Their skin wasn't burned. Even more astonishing, there wasn't even the smell of smoke upon them. The crowd could hardly comprehend it. Anyone who has stood near a fire knows the smell lingers. It clings to your clothes, your hair, your skin. Yet these men had walked inside a furnace heated beyond imagination, and somehow they emerged without even carrying the scent of it. The miracle was undeniable. No argument could explain it away. No excuse could dismiss it. The evidence stood before them, alive, breathing, unharmed. Then all eyes turned toward Nebuchadnezzar. The king stood silently for a moment. The same king who had ordered the execution, the same king who had challenged the God of Israel, the same king who had asked, "What God can rescue you from my hand?" Now his own eyes had seen the answer. His pride had brought him to the furnace, but what he witnessed there left him humbled. Finally, he spoke, not with arrogance, not with anger, but with awe. "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." The words echoed across the plain. Many could scarcely believe what they were hearing. The king who had demanded worship was now honoring the God of the very men he had condemned. He sent his messenger and rescued his servants. The king looked at the three young men standing before him, men who had chosen faith over fear, men who had chosen obedience over survival, men who had refused to bow. They trusted in him. Nebuchadnezzar's voice carried across the gathering. And they were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. For a moment, the entire plain seemed to stand still, because everyone understood what had happened. This was never merely about surviving a furnace. This was about faith. Faith that remained standing when everyone else bowed. Faith that trusted God without guarantees. Faith that endured when the cost was high. The crowd had witnessed something far greater than a miracle. They had witnessed unwavering faith, and God had honored it before an entire empire. Then Nebuchadnezzar issued another decree, a decree very different from the one that had begun this story. No longer demanding worship for himself, no longer threatening those who refused. Now he publicly acknowledged the greatness of the God who had delivered his servants. The king had not been defeated by an army. He had not been conquered by another kingdom. He had been confronted by a reality greater than his power, a reality that stood above Babylon, above kings, above furnaces, above fear itself. And standing in the center of that revelation were three young men who had simply refused to bow. Three young men who chose faith when compromise would have been easier. Three young men whose courage became a testimony to an entire empire. The furnace was behind them now. The flames were gone. The threats were gone. But the story would remain. Long after Babylon faded, long after Nebuchadnezzar was gone, long after the golden image had crumbled into dust, people would still remember the day three young men stood before a king and discovered that no fire is greater than the presence of God.
So I hope people know that the fire was never the point of this story. I mean, I get it. Amen. God is powerful. We already know that. You see, the point of this story was that there were three young men who had already made up in their minds before the pressure ever showed up. That's what stands out to me. When I read this story, this is what I see. They didn't wait until they were standing in front of Nebuchadnezzar to figure out what they believed. They had already settled it. They said, "We are not bowing." Can you imagine when the herald comes and gives the decree from the king that at the sound of the music, everyone must bow, and if they don't, they will be thrown into the fire? Can you imagine what was going through their mind? You see, but already having this faith to say, well, brothers, I guess we're going to get thrown in the fire because we're not bowing. We're not going to compromise. And that's where real faith starts. Not when the miracle shows up, before it does. I want you to think about it. Most of us will probably never stand in front of a 90-foot gold statue, if we're going to be honest. We're probably never going to be threatened with a literal furnace. But every single one of us is going to have moments where we're tempted to bow. Maybe it's not with our physical knees, but with our convictions. You see, the pressure to fit in. You just want to be loved by these people. You just want to be accepted to where you will compromise. You will bow just to fit in. The pressure to compromise, the pressure to stay quiet because everybody else is going the other direction. But you know it's wrong, but you don't say anything. Why? Because you want to bow. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Well, it should, because the spirit behind Babylon is still alive today. America, Europe, Asia, Mexico, everywhere. Culture still tells you to blend in. The world still tells you to lower your standards. People still say it ain't that serious. You see, but these three young men, they remind us that following God has never been about doing what everybody else do. So when people want you to fit in, will you bow? Or will you say, but if he don't? You see, your faith should be so focused on God to where anytime temptation comes or compromise comes, you can say, but if he don't? You see, sometimes obedience means you're the only one standing. You might not have friends on this life. Can I just be honest with you? Loved ones may walk away because you refuse to bow. You may not get that promotion on your job. Why? Because you refuse to bow. But here's what really gets me. When they said, our God is able, that is very powerful. But when they followed it with, but even if he doesn't, that's faith. You know what? That's crazy faith. How many of you got crazy faith? I want you to type crazy faith in the chat if you can say, but even if he doesn't. You see, because they weren't trusting God for a miracle. They weren't trusting God for a come right now. No. They were trusting God, period. Even if he don't come right now. Even if he don't perform the miracle, we're trusting him, period. And I think that's something every believer, you have to wrestle with at some point in time. Can I trust God when I don't understand? Can I obey God even when it's uncomfortable? Can I stay faithful even when it's going to cost me something? I know it's going to cost me something. You see, these brothers, they answered that question before the fire ever got hot. And because they stood, an entire empire got to witness the power of God. You see, that's the kind of faith I want to have. Is that the kind of faith you want? I don't need loud faith. You see, you got a lot of people running their mouth saying, I got faith. No. I don't need performative faith. No. Just the kind of faith that says, Lord, no matter what comes, I'm staying with you. So whatever you're facing, I want you to stand. When everybody else bows, you stand. When it's uncomfortable, stand. When obedience costs you something, stand. Because if this story teaches us anything, it's that God has a way of showing up for people who refuse to compromise. Hey, y'all, remember, when the world is still trying to figure it out, the Bible told it first.